Hi everyone, and welcome to another part of Capablanca's Chess Fundamentals. The customary quote: "Oh yes, the past can hurt, but you can either run from it or learn from it." Rafiki from The Lion King. A brief review of the last part, where we continued our discussion on direct attacks en masse in Chapter 4. Afterwards, we discussed the topics the force of the threatened attack and relinquishing the initiative. So now, moving further into the book, Capablanca starts the next topic under the heading number 24, cutting off pieces from the scene of action. He writes, "Very often in a game, a master only plays to cut off, so to speak, one of the pieces from the scene of actual conflict. Often a bishop or a knight is completely put out of action. In such cases, we might say that from that moment the game is won, because for all practical purposes there will be one more piece on one side than on the other. A very good illustration is furnished by the following game. Example 54. Played at the Hastings Victory Tournament 1919, 4 knights. White, William Winter. Black, Jose Raul Capablanca. Capablanca's opponent here is William Winter, a British chess player who played in the first half of the 20th century. He won the British Open Chess Championship in 1934 and the British Chess Championship in 1935 and 1936. Capablanca continues. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Knight C3, Knight F6, Bishop B5, Bishop B4, castles, castles, and bishop takes c6. Nimzovich's variation, which I have played successfully in many a game. It gives white a very solid game. Nimzovich's idea is that white will in due time be able to play f4, opening a line for their rooks, which in combination with the posting of a knight at f5 should be sufficient to win. He thinks that should black attempt to stop the knight from going to f5, they will have to weaken their game in some other way. Whether this is true or not remains to be proved, but in my opinion the move is perfectly good. On the other hand, there is no question that black can easily develop their pieces, but it must be considered that in this variation, white does not attempt to hinder black's development. They simply attempt to build up a position which white considers impregnable and from which they can start an attack in due course. D takes on c6. The alternative b takes c6 gives white the best of the game without doubt. Capablanca gives a footnote here citing "See game Capablanca vs. Kupchik from Havana International Masters Tournament, book 1913 by Jose Raul Capablanca," or a game in the Carlsbad Tournament of 1911, Widmar playing black vs. Alakhin. Returning back to the game, Capablanca continues. So, d takes c6, d3, bishop d6, and bishop g5. This move is not at all in accordance with the nature of this variation. The general strategical plan for white is to play h3, to be followed in time by the advance of the g-pawn to g4 and the bringing of the queen's knight to f5 via e2 and g3, or d1 and e3. Then, if possible, the king's knight is linked with the other knight by placing it at either h4, g3 or e3 as the occasion demands. The white king sometimes remains at g1 and other times it is placed at g2, but mostly at h1. Finally, in most cases comes f4 and then the real attack begins. Sometimes it is a direct assault against the king. Capablanca gives another footnote here citing C. Nimzevich's game in the All-Russian Masters Tournament 1914 at St. Petersburg against Levitsky, I believe. Capablanca continues, and at other times it comes simply to finessing for positional advantage in the endgame after most of the pieces have been exchanged. Another footnote with citation by Capablanca. See Capablanca versus Janoski game, New York Masters Tournament 1913. All of the games mentioned in footnotes on this page, number 96 of the book, are readily available on an internet platform such as chessgames.com, among others. Capablanca continues. So, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4 and c5. To prevent d4 and to draw white into playing knight d5, which would prove fatal, Black's plan is to play g5 as soon as the circumstances permit, in order to free his queen and knight from the pin by the bishop. Knight d5. White falls into the trap. Only lack of experience can account for this move. White should have considered that a player of my experience and strength would never allow such a move if it were good. g5. After this move, White's game is lost. White cannot play knight takes g5 because knight takes d5 will win a piece. Therefore, he must play bishop g3 either before or after knight takes f6 check, with disastrous results in either case, as will be seen. Knight takes f6 check, queen takes f6, bishop g3, bishop g4, h3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, queen takes f3, g takes f3, and f6. A simple examination will show that white is minus a bishop for all practical purposes. He can only free it by sacrificing one pawn, and possibly not even then. At least it would lose time besides the pawn. Black now devotes all his energy to the queen side, and having practically a bishop more, the result cannot be in doubt. The rest of the game is given so that the student may see how simple it is to win such a game. King g2, a5, a4, king f7, rook h1, king e6, h4, and rook b8. There is no necessity to pay any attention to the king's side because white gains nothing by exchanging pawns and opening the h-file. H takes g5, h takes g5, b3, c6, rook a2, b5, rook a1, and c4. If white takes the proffered pawn, Black regains it immediately by rook b4 after b takes c4. So c4, a takes b5, c takes b3, c takes b3, rook takes b5, rook a4, rook takes b3, d4, rook b5, rook c4, rook b4, rook takes c6, and rook takes d4, where white resigned the game. Moving further, Capablanca starts the next topic under the heading number 25, a player's motives criticized in a specimen game. He writes, "Now that a few of my games with my own notes have been given, I offer for close perusal and study a very fine game played by Sir George Thomas, one of England's foremost players, against Mr. FFL Alexander in the championship of the City of London Chess Club in the winter of 1919-1920. It has the interesting feature for the student that Sir George Thomas kindly wrote the notes to the game for me at my request, and with the understanding that I would make the comments on them that I considered appropriate. Sir George Thomas's notes are in brackets and thus will be distinguished from my own comments. In our case, I will simply name which of the two are commenting during the game." Capablanca continues. Example 55. Queen's Gambit declined. The notes within brackets by Sir George Thomas. White, Mr. FFL Alexander. Black, Sir George Thomas. Sir George Thomas's opponent is Frederick Forrest Laurie Alexander. He was a British chess player who played in the first half of the 20th century. At the age of 70 in 1950, he surprised the pundits by winning against two prominent chess players, including F.M. Boguljubov. Capablanca continues. d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, knight d7, bishop g5, c6, e3, and queen a5. Sir George, one of the objects of Black's method of defense is to attack White's queen's knight doubly by knight e4, followed by d takes c4. But knight d2 is probably a strong way of meeting this threat. Capablanca, there are besides two good reasons for this method of defense. First, that it is not as much played as some of the other defenses, and consequently not so well known. And second, that it leaves Black with two bishops against bishop and knight, which in a general way constitutes an advantage. Bishop takes f6, knight takes f6, a3, knight e4, queen b3, and bishop e7. Capablanca, this is not the logical place for the bishop, which should have been posted at d6. In the opening, time is of great importance, and therefore the player should be extremely careful in their development and make sure they post their pieces in the right places. Bishop d3, knight takes c3, b takes c3, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, and bishop f6. Sir George, I did not want White's knight to come to e5 from where I could not dislodge it by f6 without weakening my e-pawn. Capablanca, The same result could be accomplished by playing bishop d6. Incidentally, it bears out my previous statement that the bishop should have been originally played to d6. Castles. Capablanca. The alternative was e4 followed by e5 and then castles. White would thereby assume the initiative but would weaken his pawn position considerably and might be compelled to stake all on a violent attack against the king. This is a turning point in the game, and it is in such positions that the temperament and style of the player decide the course of the game. So castles, e4, e5 and d5. Sir George. White might play rook f to d1, keeping the option of breaking up the center later on. I wanted him to advance his pawn as there is now a fine post for my bishop at c5. Capablanca. By this move, White shows that he does not understand the true value of his position. His only advantage consisted in the underdeveloped condition of Black's light square bishop. He should therefore have made a plan to prevent the bishop from coming out. Or if that were not possible, then he should try to force Black to weaken his pawn position in order to come out with the bishop. There are three moves to consider. First, a4, in order to maintain the white bishop in the dominating position that it now occupies. This would have been met by queen c7. Second, either of the rooks to d1 in order to threaten d takes e5, bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes e5 and bishop takes f7 check. This would have been met by bishop g4. And third, h3 to prevent bishop g4, and by playing either rook to d1, followed up as previously stated to force Black to play b5, which would weaken his queen's side pawns. Thus, by playing h3, White would have attained the desired object. The text move d5 blocks the action of the white bishop and facilitates Black's development. Hereafter, White will act on the defensive, and the interest throughout the rest of the game will center mainly on Black's play and the manner in which he carries out the attack. Queen c7 and bishop d3. Sir George. This seems wrong as it makes the development of Black's queen's wing easier. At present, he cannot play b6 because of the reply d takes c6, followed by bishop d5. So bishop d3, b6, c4, bishop b7, and rook fc1. Sir George, with the idea of rook a b1 and c5. But it only compels Black to bring his bishop to c5, which he would do in any case. Bishop e7, rook c2, bishop c5, queen b2, and f6. Sir George, it would have been better probably to play rook f e8 with the idea of f5 presently. Capablanca. Black's play hereabout is weak. It lacks force, and there seems to be no well-defined plan of attack. It is true that these are the most difficult positions to handle in a game. In such cases, a player must conceive a plan on a large scale, which promises chances of success, and with it all, it must be a plan that can be carried out with the means at his disposal. From the look of the position, it seems that Black's best chance would be to mass his forces for an attack against White's center, to be followed by a direct attack against the king. He should therefore play rook a e8, threatening f5. If White is able to defeat this plan, or rather to prevent it, then once he has fixed some of the white pieces on the king side, he should quickly shift his attack to the queen side and open line for his rooks, which once they enter in the action should produce an advantage on account of the great power of the two bishops. So f6, rook b1, rook d8, a4, bishop a6, and rook d1. Sir George, White has clearly lost time with his rook moves. Rook e8 and queen b3. Sir George, to bring his queen across after knight h4 and bishop e2. Rook d6, knight h4, g6, bishop e2, and c takes d5. Sir George, I thought this exchange necessary here, as White is threatening to play his bishop via g4 to e6. If he retook with the c-pawn, I intended to exchange bishops and rely on the two pawns to one on the queen's wing. I did not expect him to retake it with the e-pawn, which seemed to expose him to a violent kingside attack. Capablanca. Black's judgment in this instance I believe to be faulty. Had White retaken with the c-pawn, as he expected, he would have had the worst of the pawn position, as White would have had a passed pawn, well supported on the queen side. His only advantage would lie in his having a very well posted bishop against a badly posted knight, and on the fact that in such positions as the above, the bishop is invariably stronger than the knight. He could and should have prevented all that by playing bishop c8, as had White then replied with queen g3, he could then play c takes d5, and White would not have been able to retake with the c-pawn on account of bishop takes f2 check, winning the exchange. But Black played c takes d5 in the game, and play continued with e takes d5, e4, g3, and e3. Capablanca. I do not like this move. It would have been better to hold it in reserve and to play f5, to be followed in due time by g5 and f4. After having placed the queen at d7, f7, or some other square as the occasion demanded. The text move e3 blocks the action of the powerful bishop at c5, and tends to make white's position safer than it should have been. The move in itself is a very strong attacking move, but it is isolated and there is no effective continuation. Such advances, as a rule, should only be made when they can be followed by a concerted or coordinated action of the pieces. f4, bishop c8, knight f3, bishop f5, rook b2, rook e4, king g2, queen c8, knight g1, and g5. Sir George, if now bishop f3, g takes f4, bishop takes e4, and bishop takes e4 check with a winning attack. So g5, f takes g5, f takes g5, rook f1, and g4. Capablanca, rook h6 was the alternative. White's only move would have been king h1. The position now is evidently won for black, and it is only a question of finding the right course. The final attack is now carried on by Sir George Thomas in an irreproachable or flawless manner. Bishop d3, rook f6, knight e2, and queen f8. Sir George, again preventing bishop takes e4 by the masked attack on white's rook. White therefore protects his rook. Capablanca, if knight f4, e2, knight takes e2, rook takes e2 check, rook takes e2, bishop e4 check, double exclamation mark. Bishop takes e4, best. Rook takes f1, and white is lost. If, however, against knight f4, black plays queen h6 and white queen c2, I take pleasure in offering the position to my readers as a most beautiful and extraordinary win for black, beginning with queen h3 check. I leave the variations for the student to work out. Apparently, queen h3 check here is a blunder for black, and Capablanca, in all honesty, might have simply miscalculated the resulting position. After knight takes h3, g takes h3 check, and king h1, white is not only able to hold on, but has a slight advantage in the position, which remains difficult to play nonetheless. I take no credit for coming up with these moves on my own and simply use the assistance of Stockfish in this regard, one of the powerful chess engines we have access to in this modern day and age, something which was unavailable at the time this book was written. Capablanca continues. So, queen f8, rook b1, queen h6, and queen c2. Sir George, making a double attack on the rook which still cannot be taken, and preparing to defend the h-pawn. Capablanca, if either the rook or the bishop are taken, white would be mated in a few moves. Queen h3 check, king h1, and rook takes c4, double exclamation mark. Sir George, if rook h6, knight g1, queen takes g3 and queen g2. Black therefore tries to get the queen away from the defense. Capablanca, a very beautiful move and the best way to carry on the attack. Queen takes c4. Sir George, the best defense was rook takes f5, but black would emerge with a queen against rook and knight. So queen takes c4 and bishop takes d3. Sir George, again not rook h6 because of d6 discovered check. So bishop takes d3, rook takes f6. If queen takes d3, then at last rook h6 wins. So rook takes f6, bishop takes c4, knight f4 and e2. Sir George, the queen has no escape, but white has no time to take it. Rook g1 and queen f1, where white resigned the game. Capablanca, a very fine finish. Alright, we conclude this part of Capablanca's chess fundamentals here, where chapter 4 of the book also concludes. We shall continue onwards from the next part. Here is a look at the recent channel support from my Twitch stream. Several new supporters: Abstention, Rreyv, SirTrumpet, Grand Mistress Iron, Drunky Skunky and AB Shakespeare. Grand Mistress Iron and Drunky Skunky are both fellow streamers. I will post links to their channel in the video description. Do check them out. Thank you for the kind support, everyone. Much appreciated. Till next time, take care.